welcome to another edition of Anarchast, your home for anarchy on the internet. I have coming in from the Great White North, from London, Ontario, Canada, Sieg Pedde, and he's an interesting guy. He actually was the very first leader of the Libertarian Party of Canada back in 1973, which is kind of interesting because we've now had on three one's current, three Libertarian Party of Canada leaders on Anarchast. So that kind of goes to show what kind of people are generally running the Libertarian Party of Canada. They're all anarchists. Sieg was the first, and then we had Katie Chown on for a while, and then she left, and now Tim Moen is the leader of the Libertarian Party of Canada, and great guy. I really like Tim a lot, and he's actually coming down here to Anarchapulco. He's going to be one of our headline speakers here on the beach, February 27th to March 1st. So really honored to have on the very first anarchist leader of the Libertarian Party of Canada, Sieg Pedde. And very first question that I got to ask, though, Sieg, is how did you become an anarchist?
Well, that's I always enjoy that question when I listen to other people answer it. I think I was born an anarchist. I never really liked being told what to do, even as a little child. And certainly as I listened to my parents, who lived very, very troubled lives, being shunted around from one country to another in Europe, and each spending time in Siberia, not by choice, and listening to what happened to them under the when the Russian Revolution came about in 1917, and then later in when they were back in Poland in a German community there, what happened when Hitler did his thing. I soon discovered that anything bad that had happened in my family history was at the hand of some form of government or another, and not unreasonably concluded that governments are not necessarily very good. And so there's a nice long answer for a short question, I think.
So were you born in Russia as well?
No. By that time, my parents were allowed to leave Siberia, which is where my father had lived the longest. My mother, of course, was in a different family. They were both kids at the time. They were allowed to go back to Poland, to the community where they had lived. And then when Hitler invaded, then they fled. And I ended up being born in northern Germany at the end of the war.
That's interesting. And then when did you come over to Canada?
We came here in 1949. I was 3.5 at the time. And so first in Alberta, you'll be happy to know, because we lived in Barrhead. You familiar with
I've got a lot of family in Barrhead. That's funny. Yeah.
Really?
A lot of German side of the family.
Yeah. You familiar with a little community called Freedom?
No.
That was my first home in Canada. A little bit of irony there. It's not far from Barrhead, and it's a tiny little place, probably, I don't know, a dozen or two homes, so would be my guess. I'm not sure anymore. But I believe it was my maternal grandparents lived there, and that was our first home in Canada.
Huh, that's interesting. Yeah, not many people know Barrhead, I'm sure. It's a very small little farming town.
Exactly.
Yeah, interesting. So let's talk about how you got involved in the Libertarian Party of Canada. You were telling me that you were involved with a group of people and around 1973 and went to the U.S. and decided you wanted to do something like that in Canada. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how that happened?
Sure. What actually happened just before that, I was speaking with a friend from California, and he told me about an organization in California called SIL, Society for Individual Liberty. And he promised he would have them send me some literature, which he did, and they did. And I read this stuff, and from their literature learned about a convention in 1973 in Cleveland. So I didn't know any other Canadian libertarians. I didn't know there were any. So I went there with my then wife and met a bunch of other Canadians. We chatted, decided we wanted to do something like that, came back to Canada and set the wheels rolling. The head of the group was Bruce Evoy. I don't know if you've ever heard of him. Interesting guy. And the official founding of the party in 1973 was on Robert A. Heinlein's birthday. You familiar with Heinlein? good libertarian. So in his honor, we started it on his birthday, which, if memory serves, was July 7th, although I don't want to swear to that. So away we went. It was an interesting ride. We expected things to happen a little quicker. And of course, they didn't. And today, there is certainly a lot of libertarian rhetoric, but there's very little libertarian practice. A lot of people call themselves libertarians and really don't know what the term means, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Especially,
Yeah, there was just a poll done in the U.S. Asking people who say they're libertarians what they feel on certain things, and what they feel about certain things isn't very libertarian, so they don't really seem to understand. And I think it's like the new cool word to be or something.
They may have certain libertarian preferences, but all in all, they still seem to want to intrude on my life and yours.
Yeah.
And to the extent to which they want to do that, they're not libertarian.
Yeah, that's the funny part about these people who say they're libertarian, like Glenn Beck, who's essentially a neocon, and then you have Bill Maher, who's a total liberal. And so that what they say is it's ridiculous and stupid. But they say, like Bill Maher will say, well, I really think drugs should be legal because, I'm a liberal, and that makes me pretty much a libertarian. It's like, well, no, you have to apply it to everything. You can't just pick the things you like and say, I'm libertarian on that thing. No, it's all or nothing, or you don't call yourself a libertarian. It's ridiculous and embarrassing for those people, but they're getting away with it. So we'll see how this all develops. So were you involved with the Libertarian Party all the way through the 70s, 80s, 90s? I don't know any of the history of the Libertarian Party in Canada up until I met Katie Chown.
No, I've always supported them financially to some degree or another. But once I resigned as leader in 1974, I did not take an active role.
Okay.
I just stayed in the background. Just to give you an example, in 1973, I said that book meetings for me anywhere in Canada, and I'll attend. And I'll give speeches and do all the usual stuff, the sort of thing that I'm sure that Tim Owen is doing now. And so I remember flying into Ottawa, and they had booked, the organizers had booked an auditorium of some kind, highly optimistic, and one person aside from the organizers showed up. So I gave a speech to one person.
You actually did the speech like a regular speech? I would have just went out to dinner with them or something.
An entire speech. I thought I felt it. I had to do it. And of course, don't regret it. That's what you should do.
That's funny.
So it's been a struggle.
Yeah, no, well, it's definitely grown since then. I don't know where it's at right now, but I'm seeing Tim Owen's getting a lot of attention right now. He's doing a lot of the right things. He's on Huffington Post, writing a lot of stuff, shaking things up. So I call him the Ron Paul of Canada. He sort of is at this moment in time. And I see huge potential for him if he just keeps it up, doing what he's doing. I think Canada, too, as very socialist sort of minded as it is in general, it's also kind of a place that's open to really interesting politics. For example, Rob Ford, that guy shows like people don't mind if you're kind of wild and crazy, as long as, if it's kooky or crazy, and that's what a lot of people think libertarianism is, which it isn't, but they think it is. Canadians seem to be like fairly okay with it. Like Pierre Trudeau, that was a very interesting prime minister. He was always giving the finger to the media, and Jean Chrétien was like beating people up in the crowd sometimes, and people didn't mind. They're kind of okay with the south side of the box sort of thing. So Tim might be coming at a great time to get their attention.
That's a very interesting point, because even in 1974, in the federal election, I got a grand total, I think it was 71 votes. But on the ballot were the Communist Party of Canada and the Marxist-Leninist Marxist-Leninist Party of Canada, and some other weird ones that I can't remember. So yeah, certainly Canada makes it easy or easier for parties to get on the ballot and so on. That doesn't mean that they get any credibility necessarily or get any exposure, but certainly they're doing more than paying lip service to giving people a voice. Does it lead anywhere? Well, not so far. We still basically have the big three parties here, the Conservatives, Liberals, and the New Democrats, and they're largely interchangeable from my perspective. hardly any advantage to voting over one over another.
Yeah, it's almost as bad as the U.S. Not quite as bad, but almost as bad. There's definitely not much difference between the Conservatives and the Liberals. I can't tell any difference anyway. And the NDP, they're really communist sounding, but they don't really change too much of anything. Well, we'll see. So tell me about what you've been doing for the last few decades. You sent me a bunch of information on things you're doing, and you're definitely not sitting around bored by the looks of things. You're doing a development in Panama and many other things. So are you sort of like an entrepreneur, sort of a businessman? Is that sort of what you do?
Yeah, I like being an entrepreneur. It enables me to think of something, do it, make money and be happy, lose some money and be not so happy. But, I've always subscribed to the opinion that you're responsible for whatever you do. And if you do something good, you deserve to reap the benefits. If you do something that was perhaps ill-advised, then you should pay the price all by yourself and not expect someone else to come along and bail you out. So I've certainly done a lot of different things, had a lot of fun. And in fact, that is basically the metric by which I judge whether I should be doing something or not, is whether I'm going to enjoy it. I suspect you're very much like that as well.
Yeah, I am. And almost every business I've ever started, I've done it, and you probably understand this, I've done it because I wanted it, and it wasn't in the market. So, for example, back in the early 1990s, I was into stocks, and there was no place to get stock information on the internet, so I started one called stockhouse.com, still the largest financial website in Canada. Then Dollar Vigilante, I was like, so no one's saying this stuff that needs to be said, and no one's getting this information in a proper fashion and said straight to them because everyone else was sort of tippy-toeing around it. So, taxes, pay your taxes, and you're not slaves. I just like, no, let's say what it is. And so I started that for that reason, and then and I really enjoy it. Actually, I enjoy commenting and writing and analyzing and helping people as well to understand what's going on in the financial, monetary, political world of today, because it's definitely not boring. It's going to be, it's already pretty exciting. It's going to get much more exciting and crazy and scary over the next few years. So yeah, I'm like that too. If I'm doing something and I don't enjoy it, it just doesn't seem worth it to me. I don't do something just for the money, and you're probably the same way by the sounds of it. Like if you told me I could start a widget factory, but I'd have to be there every day, all day, overseeing it, and I'd make $10 million a year, I'd be like, nah, I don't think so. I just, I want to do something that I like, I'm excited about. And when you do that, of course, and Rick Rule, who's a past Anarchast guest and a near billionaire who's created a lot of wealth in his life, he said that if you do something you love, you just can't help but be successful because you're so passionate about it. Now, things might screw up, the market might change, or you might be some unexpected errors, but in general, if you're doing something you love and you're passionate about it, it's really hard not to be successful with it.
Yeah, I agree. And certainly spreading the message now, as you're doing and as I've tried to do over the decades, is important, because a lot of people really don't understand what is going on, number one. And in a larger sense, what's happening with the economy, how the economy is manipulated, the money printing, that you talk about a lot, and all this sort of thing. And it's not that people are, they may be ignorant, but they're not stupid. They just haven't come across the right information. And of course, we're trying to do that. And I think it's very important. And I see troubled times ahead, as I'm sure you do. And what's going to happen? I don't know. But I think we're all better armed if we actually know what caused it and what mistakes we shouldn't repeat again.
Yeah, I agree. And so that's a big part of the reason why I do a lot of things is I think the more that we can get this information out there, let people know what's going on, because so many people are just plain brainwashed. They've been brainwashed since birth almost, put into public indoctrination camps called schools for 12 years and just fed information. all their television programming at night, for the most part, is programming in one way or another of a certain worldview that the state wants you to have, and that's all going away. Technology is changing everything. So, and it's also time. We went through sort of a century, as you well know, of just a horrible century. If you look back at the 20th century, it was a century of total war.
Yeah, no kidding.
So many people died. Hundreds of millions of people got killed by their own governments, and that wasn't even including in the wars. If you add up the wars and people killed by their own governments, you're getting pretty close to 1 billion people in that century. And a lot of people say to us anarchists, "Well, you guys are crazy. Like, well, you know, it'd be chaos and people would be dying if it wasn't for the state." It's like, do you even know what's been going on for the last 100 years? Yeah, it's really crazy how people just don't be able to see it. And I think a lot of people won't see it until it's too late. And that's too bad for them. But we can at least say we tried and tried to help them. And if they can't figure it out, maybe it's just the way it's going to be.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I always find it amusing in a tragic kind of way, if that actually makes sense. When people say that we need a strong leadership, we need a strong leader. Well, you know, Hitler was a strong leader, Stalin was a strong leader, and so on. And look what happened. If you delegate the responsibility upwards, you're going to be, pardon the expression, screwed. If you take personal responsibility, then that's another matter altogether. You make mistakes, but they're, of course, much smaller because you're not making a mistake on behalf of millions of people. And it's much easier to solve. You get your friends and family to help you out if you need the help or the moral support. And it's another matter altogether. How do you solve something that is the result of, you know, a Hitler or a Stalin, for example? It takes generations to undo the damage. And then that doesn't even allow for the fact that so many millions of people and their offspring that never happened have disappeared from the earth, and all the good things that they could have done, and so on and so on. It doesn't make sense to me. It never has, never will. We have to run our own lives. We have to take responsibility for ourselves, and that's the way for the world to work better.
Yeah, it's surprising to me that people need to be sort of told this. I've just always been that way as well. I've always assumed that I have control of my own life, and that if I make mistakes, I have to pay for them. I don't know where this idea comes from that somehow you can sort of avoid that by joining this cult and believing in a religion called statism, and they're going to always protect you from your errors, which is impossible. Someone always has to pay. It's just who pays and how, and through the state, it's always through violence and theft, which so it's pretty horrible system, really.
It is indeed. And I think more and more people are looking to at least put one foot somewhere else. And not necessarily to expatriate completely, but at least to have the option, you know, perhaps getting some land somewhere else. We have done, you alluded to this development we have in Panama. I got together, I think you know Mark Jeftovic,
yes.
Right? Yeah. So Mark and I and some other friends, most of us are libertarian or anarcho-capitalists, and so we bought some land in Panama and are developing a property there. And the idea is that if for some reason we feel the need to spend only the winter months there because it's nice and sunny, or something more permanent, we have that option. And of course, you know, Doug Casey is doing that with the Argentina thing. There's a Galt's Gulch thing. There's Bill Bonner has the, I think it's in, do you know where Bonner's is? It's in Nicaragua.
Yeah, Nicaragua,
think, right? Yeah. And so the point I'm trying to make is that a lot of people are looking at options. And I think it's entirely proper. If things go downhill too quickly, you know, my parents, as I mentioned earlier, and millions of other people were shunted around all over the place. They had no control over where they were sent or what they could do and what they could eat and so on. And what they could eat, by the way, was usually very little. You have to be in control of your own life and create options for yourself. I think more and more people are becoming aware of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I've seen it firsthand. There's a lot of interest in those sort of things. It's sort of funny. Like we offer a lot of products that are related to liberty. Like we help people get second passports around the world. We help people get their money offshore. We help them to internationalize their assets. And I sort of laugh. I sort of say we don't really need to market these products. Just whatever the government does almost every single day just makes the phones ring. I think the phones were ringing, or the Skype calls were coming in. Our biggest day ever was when Barack Obama got reelected. There were so many people who were just like, that's it, we're out here.
I believe it.
And then who knows what the next one's going to be. If it turns out to be Hillary Clinton and her running mate, Michelle Obama, with Barack Obama as the first lady, which would be interesting. I think that will really be sort of the next sort of wave of people waking up and going, oh my God. And then what's going to be on the other side, right? It'll probably be Jeb Bush, another Bush. So it's getting pretty clear to a lot of people. And as things start to collapse even more and more, and they are, because the U.S. is just so indebted, it's beyond over. It's baked in the cake that it's going to collapse. This empire is going down, and it's not going to be over decades. It's going to be over the next few years. This decade, I'm pretty positive of it. So it's going to be interesting. And so, yeah, a lot of people are looking for that. Yeah, I'm here in Mexico. I already left, and I did it for numerous reasons, obviously. A lot of them are just personal reasons. I just don't like cold weather, but also I don't like paying taxes, and I can actually live this way, and I don't have to legally pay taxes, although I hear Canada is starting to move towards doing the U.S.-style worldwide income tax, so at that point I might have to officially become a non-Canadian, because I just refuse to support these big governments at all if I can avoid it in any way, shape, or form. And it's also much nicer not to pay taxes. So,
well, absolutely. Canada, in many ways, I think right now is much preferable to the United States, and you know all the reasons as well as I do. Will it stay that way? Of course, we have no way of knowing. Governments tend to want to grow. I mean, that's what they do. That's what they do best, is grow and exert more and more control. And it remains then to determine for yourself how much you're willing to take. And I mean, everybody's threshold is different, right? I have to say that in general, as an immigrant, Canada has been very good for me. I've been able to do a lot of things here. We were welcomed into the country, and I had to work for everything that I got. There were, when we came over, there were no such things as handouts and the sort of thing that exists today. And in fact, I've often said that the best thing the government of Canada ever did for my family when we came over was nothing. And I mean that, because everybody that came over in the 50s and earlier, basically you get off the boat. I think my dad got a check from the federal government for, or maybe it was cash, I'm not sure, for $38 at the time, which was admittedly more money than today.
It's probably about $300 today or so.
Okay, buddy. Yeah, sink or swim, and everybody swam. We lived in an immigrant community, and everybody I know became, if not successful, at least comfortable. And owned their own homes, owned businesses, or had jobs somewhere, and ended up with pensions, or whatever the situation was. And why? It's because they had no choice. There weren't better people, when we came over than current crops of immigrants. It's just that we had no choice. You had to sink or swim, again, to use that term. And sometime I think there's going to be a point where there's going to be more and more people leaving North America and Europe and going to places that have more freedom, more opportunity, and where people appreciate what's being brought to the table, new talents, maybe some capital if in fact you're allowed to take it out of your home country, and so on.
Yeah, no, we're seeing that all the time, and there's been almost every quarter in the U.S. there's records for people expatriating, actually renouncing their citizenship in the U.S., and we're just seeing a flood of it. And actually, one of our businesses, TDV Wealth Management, we've been working for months to get things fixed so that we can get around these FATCA sort of laws, but to do it all legally. It's all been signed off by lawyers, accountants. We spent quite a bit of money developing this product. It's going to be done in the next few weeks. It's been in process for about 6 months now. And when it's done, I think we're going to have an onslaught of clients. Almost everywhere we go, we mention what the product is and how it's totally legitimate, legal, signed off by lawyers in the U.S., signed off by accountants in the U.S., and people just go, oh my God, anyone's got clients that are high net worth clients that are American are looking so much for a product like this. So that's just another example of just people are just saying, almost like in Atlas Shrugged, they're just people who are productive are saying, I can't take it anymore. I'm just constantly being stomped on, have most of my money taken away every year. Then even in the U.S., when I die, they take most of the rest of it, and then even if whatever's left goes to my kids or whoever I want it to go to, they'll be taxed on it. It's like, and then the U.S. dollar constantly being inflated, so that's another form of theft. And then they're people who are productive, and especially in places like the U.S. and Canada as well. Actually, Canada is really bad for this. Canada's actually been worse. It's getting better, but I remember back in the 80s and 90s, if you had a nice car, people would hate you. They thought you were a bad person. Like that's what I was saying about that real socialist sort of mentality up there. But that's gotten a little bit better. Canada's actually gotten a little bit more capitalist than the U.S. now. And now in the U.S., they're starting to treat people who are productive as the enemy. It's just crazy.
Well, that's certainly true. And for example, corporate tax rates, personal tax rates have come down in Canada. And so certainly they're still way too high, don't get me wrong.
Anything over 0% is too
certainly high. Yeah, exactly. But certainly some of these things are moving in the right direction. Just apropos of absolutely nothing, but just something popped into my head. One of the things that I find quite humorous is this is a tendency that exists in Canada, and it exists in the States as well, and probably in other places in the world, is that people increasingly have this point of view that they have a right not to have their feelings hurt, which I find really amusing because, if I look at myself in the context of coming over as a 3.5-year-old right after the Second World War, where everybody hated the Nazis. I was German, right? My parents were born in Poland, but we were German. And I can remember as a little kid being called Nazi, which, of course, I had no idea what that was. I had to ask my mom. And I remember someone throwing a rock at me and hitting me in the temple, and calling me Nazi and so on. And, my mother, aside from being upset that, her darling son was whacked by a rock, she basically told me, it's the way of the world. People have a right to be upset. They may have lost loved ones in the war. To them, this is very real, and so on. So suck it up and get over it. That was essentially the life story or the life lesson that I was able to draw from this. But again, it just underlines the fact that all these bad things happen because of government. If there were no wars, a lot of things wouldn't happen. Generally, people try to get along. If I met you on a street, chances are we'd be yakking away about something or another in a few minutes and sharing a beer or something. But if you belong to one clique and I belong to another clique, and the larger the clique is, the more potential for problems there are. And why not? Why not just simply be an individualist and take responsible for yourself, responsibility for yourself. I'll get there eventually. And live your life that way. And that's what I always try to do.
Yeah, no, it sounds like your parents gave you some really good advice, and that's helped you throughout your life. And I think that's a really important part for parents, is to try to give their children this sort of good advice and not bad advice, especially at that early age. And I think that was good advice. What your mom gave you is, this is the way the world is. You know, we can cry about it, or we can just hold our heads up high and move on and try to make the world a better place in our own ways. And it's funny what you brought up about people not letting their emotions to get hurt. It's so pandemic now in the U.S., this political correctness. You can't say anything. If anyone gets upset about anything you say, it's a major crime and it needs to be stopped. You need to be put into a cage because you said something that someone didn't like. And there's a great comedian, one of my favorites from Australia, named Steve Hughes, and he's got a great bit on being offended. And he said, you know, I can't do it as good as him, but he said, you know, I'll be talking as a comedian, and a woman will go, I'm offended. And he's like, so? Nothing happens. It's not like you go home and you wake up in the morning and you have leprosy. No, good, you're offended. So nothing. It's, you know, be offended if you want to be offended, but it's not an actual.
We lost your audio again.
Yeah, sorry.
Not sure what's going on. Can you hear me now? It's good old Scott. Yeah, you're back.
I think I got a short in my mic.
So I missed the punchline there, Jeff. Sorry.
The punchline was, you know, if you get offended, you don't wake up the next day and you have leprosy. You know, it's nothing happens when you get offended. And this whole idea that you shouldn't ever be offended, or no one should ever be able to say anything that offends you is insane. It's crazy. And that's political correctness, and that's again a political thing. And that's we're anarchists, so we don't believe in politics. So we don't have to be politically correct. So fuck them.
Well, I'm very careful not to offend people, but only because I want to be a nice guy.
Yeah, no, me too.
But certainly, if you have a point of view that is out of sync with everybody else's, you should be able to state that point of view. And if you happen to be a different color from somebody else, or have a different religion or non-religion, or, you know, whatever the case might be, you should be allowed to do that. But you always have to draw the line at the point where it might hurt somebody else. And I don't want to hurt you, you don't want to hurt me, and we can coexist. And it doesn't matter how different you are from me or vice versa, as long as we don't step over that line, you know, that's between us. We should be able to do pretty much whatever we want.
Yep, that's the anarchist creed, is same thing as Jesus said, do unto others as you want them to do unto you. And we don't want someone to rule us, so we don't want to rule other people. That's what anarchy is. And it's peaceful and a wonderful philosophy, and it's pretty insane that a lot of people think it's crazy. Of all the philosophies.
Makes no sense. I helped my son years ago write an essay. And it had to do something with, I don't know, how people interact or something. I can't remember. You know, how to make sure everybody coexists properly and so on. And I was raised in a very religious household. And so I remembered, of course, you know, the teachings of Jesus, the New Testament stuff, not the Old Testament stuff where people butchered each other and so on. And by the way, I am not religious at this moment, but that's the way I grew up. And so we talked about the golden rule because it's similar to the teachings of Christ, or at least, you know, what I was exposed to. And so we did some research and discovered that every major society in the world, every major religion in the world has some variant of, you know, something like a golden rule. And so I found that very interesting, is that if billions of people know or should know that the way to coexist peaceably with everyone else is to treat them the way you want to be treated, what the hell's the matter with us? What are we doing? You know, because obviously we're not doing that. We're not treating other people the way we want to be treated. You and I might, and friends of ours might, and so on. So let's, you know, get that out of the way. But most people are not like that. They want to control people close to them. They want to control people far away. They want their governments to control even more people, and so on and so on. And I don't know. It's some sort of an obsession that just doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, me either. I think there's so many reasons why it is so, but it'd take forever to go into all the reasons. But a lot of it's just fear. People have a lot of fear, and of course the government and the media loves to stoke that fear. They'll just try to tell you every day it's dangerous, you know, fear everybody, fear everybody. And when you start to fear people, you actually do want to start to actually control other people because you fear them. So you figure if you can control them, then you'll be safe. But the actual fear is irrational, and it's obviously fear is the opposite of love. And the more that people can just open themselves, because that's the thing about anarchy, I think, that I'm starting to realize more and more, is it's really just for a lot of people, it's hard to get their heads around, because you have to pretty much just open yourself completely up and say to the world, you know, I am me. You know, there's a point I'm trying to make here with this, that you're basically, like you said as well, that people they want some sort of backup. They want this collective to always make sure that they're always okay. Whereas a real anarchist is saying, I'm going to take whatever comes to me. And I don't expect anyone. And now, if I have people who want to help me, if I get into a rough spot, that's great. But I don't expect it of anybody, unless we have a contract to do that, which would be like an insurance contract or things like that. Exactly. Which is actually great. People taking responsibility for their own lives, so it's bizarre. I think there's so many reasons that people are the way they are. But the more that, I don't know if you've traveled a ton, but I've traveled a lot, and you meet a lot of people who are pretty disconnected from the world in terms of the political world. Even here in Mexico, a lot of people, they just don't care about the government or anything, and they're just so much more self-reliant, so much happier, so much nicer. And then you meet people in a place like the U.S. where there's so much government involvement, and there's safety nets for everything, and no one's happy, and it's just really bizarre and interesting the way the world is today, and it's going to be interesting to see, because these states are going to be collapsing, the Western states for the most part, and I don't share quite as much optimism about Canada as I think you do, because the more you look into it, Canada, 90% of the economy is with the U.S., so if the U.S. goes down, that's not going to be good for Canada at all. The Canadian debt situation is not a whole lot better than many other countries, including the U.S. It's very high debt to GDP. There's nothing backing the Canadian dollar at all except for the U.S. dollar. The Canadian government sold all its gold in the 80s and 90s. It's going to be interesting to see what happens. These things are all going to start to collapse one way or another. Banks are going to start to collapse. The monetary system and the financial system is completely jury-rigged at this moment in time. Anything could collapse the entire structure. So we're going to probably head into hyperinflation in the West over the next few years. So it's going to be interesting, because people are going to have to adjust and adapt. And but like you said, people, when the only option they're given is just to survive, they will survive. They're almost like cockroaches. People can survive almost anything if they have to. But the problem with governments is they often don't let people have to make that choice. So they'll go on welfare, and then I'm getting $800 a month, or in places like Denmark, like $3,000 a month. So I'm just going to sit here and watch TV and drink a beer and sit here for the rest of my life and not do anything, which doesn't really improve anybody's particular life.
Well, that's quite right. The human race is very resilient, and given whatever the circumstances might be, chances are you'll come out of it okay. Maybe not as well as you might like, but you come out okay. Certainly much stronger than when you went in. But if you're constantly being bailed out, and if you're being protected from the results of your actions, how in the world is that going to happen? It's nobody learns any lessons. You keep on repeating the same mistakes. You have multi-generations on some sort of dole or another. And, philosophically, I don't mind helping people. If someone comes to me for help, no problem. Let's work something out, and let's try to help each other. But doing anything at the point of a gun is not the way it should be done. And the gun, as you've pointed out many times, is implied. And try not doing what you're expected to do, and it comes out in a hurry, increasingly quickly these days, especially in the United States.
Yeah, it's I must see every day now just some cop just shooting someone in the back who was not doing anything. It's getting pretty wild and crazy. So yeah, I try to keep these a little bit shorter, but you're an interesting guy, so we've been talking for a while. Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about, or anything you want to let people know?
The only thing I would say is you have a lot of, I'm sure, very bright followers that read TDV and that watch Anarchast. I'm looking for people that are programmers. And if anybody is interested in both in app programming and in web programming, Mark and I are working on a few things that might interest some people. And we're looking to form a separate company, do a bunch of projects in this. A lot of it has to do with the libertarianism and anarchism. And people could go to www.thoughtcrime.com. There's just a mock-up there of what we want to do eventually, but it'll give people an idea of where we might wish to go. And we have some other projects as well. So if you allow me to make that plug, I'm very much appreciative. And maybe we'll hear from someone.
I'm sure you will, actually. Every time someone brings something like this up, they usually get a lot of people contacting them. So, yeah, there's a lot of opportunities out there, and people just, a lot of people don't seem to see it. So if you are a programmer, obviously, there you go. You have another opportunity to do something here. If you're not, and you don't have any major skills, and you think you might be decent at programming, definitely look into it, because I've never seen a computer programmer who's essentially unemployed ever. There's just so much opportunity in that space, and it's growing all the time with what's going on now with Bitcoin 2.0 and decentralization of the internet. That's a whole other thing. If you can become a person who's well known or well respected for your skills in knowing this area, you'll have nothing but opportunities ahead of you, whether it's as an employee or as a entrepreneur. It's just going to be nothing but opportunity. So definitely check that out. I'd like to thank Sieg for being on with us, the very first Libertarian Party of Canada leader, third one we've had on the program. It's pretty funny and cool. And that's it for Anarchast, your home for anarchy on the internet. Peace, love, and anarchy.